Good morning, and thank you for joining us for today's webinar, Hackers Want Access to Your Company's Retirement Plans Accounts Too, presented by Rain Associates, a top 100 regional CPA. My name is Imani Fields, and I'll be walking you through a few housekeeping items for today's webinar. First, if you have any questions during today's presentation, you may enter them into the chat box on your screen. We will try to answer as many questions as we can at the conclusion of today's presentation. However, to be respectful of your time, we know that we will not be able to get to them all. Therefore, following today's webinar, we will review all questions and send out the answers via email as soon as we can. If you'd like a copy of today's slides, you'll find that they're available in the handout section on the webinar dashboard's computer screen. Today's webinar will be presented by Paul McEwen, Shawn Richardson, and Richard Carpenter. Paul McEwen is a principal at Rain Associates, where he leads the firm's retirement plan, consulting, and administration services team. He is responsible for consulting with clients on fiduciary best practices related to their qualified retirement plans, partnering with investment advisors to build their retirement plan practices, and helping clients keep their retirement plans in compliance with federal requirements. With more than 30 years of accounting industry experience, his areas of expertise include retirement plan fiduciary issues, plan compliance, and reporting issues. Shawn Richardson is a principal at Rain Associates, as well as a retired U.S. Army Master Sergeant and former cybersecurity advisor to the Army Reserve Cyber Operations Group and the U.S. Cyber Command. With more than 25 years of information systems engineering and cybersecurity operations experience, he leads the firm's cybersecurity services team. Shawn is committed to help guide the small to medium-sized businesses of America down the path of entrepreneurial freedom without the risk of compromise. And last, Richard Carpenter, president and founder of USVI Pensions and Consulting, and former founder of the Technical Answer Group, now owned by Walter Kluwer Law and Business. In the 10 years he operated TAG, he developed over 2,000 customer relationships with the accounting firms, law firms, insurance companies, mutual fund companies, and more than 1,500 third-party administration firms. He has an MBA with an emphasis in finance from the University of South Florida. He earned the Certified Employee Benefits Specialist and Certified Pension Consultant. Richard entered the pension business in 1978. He installed the first 401k plan in November of 1981, 2 weeks after first proposed 401k regulations. Clients have included Price Waterhouse, Office Depot, and Alamo Rent-A-Car. And now I'll pass it over to you, Paul.
Thanks, Imani. Good morning, everybody, and thank you very much for tuning in today and sharing part of your day with us. I'm really excited about the topic today, and I'm in a bit of a different role. Normally, I'm a presenter of actual content on these webinars for Ray and Associates, but this was an area that I felt like was a little bit outside of my scope of expertise. But fortunately, I have friends in the industry with very deep knowledge, and so I'm thrilled to be able to have Richard Carpenter on the webinar talking specifically about best practices when it comes to fiduciary governance of retirement plans. Shawn Richardson from our cybersecurity group at Ray and Associates, who's going to speak more broadly about the cybersecurity ecosystem and how these threats arise and kind of what you need to be thinking about as a plan sponsor. And so kind of the genesis or the inspiration for the webinar today was in serving as the head of our own retirement plan committee at Ray and Associates, which is about 400 participants and about 70 million in assets, just to give you some sense of where we're at in terms of managing our own plan. But we have a retirement plan committee comprised of 5 individuals, and I lead the group. Our record keeper went through an acquisition, a merger and acquisition with a larger record keeper. And I got an email kind of out of the blue from that record keeper that talked about changing processes with respect to the distributions. And because of my relationship with Richard and the conversations I've had with him over the years, my antenna instantly went up, and I started thinking about, okay, what are the risks here? What do I need to be thinking about in terms of risk to our plan participants? And so I started asking a bunch of questions to and satisfied myself that security was intact, but also wanted to be thinking about how do we interact with our record keeper, right? We've got record keeper controls, but what kind of controls do we have in place at Ray and Associates to coordinate with those controls so that things don't get, balls don't get dropped in the distribution process. So as I was thinking about that, I thought, well, if I'm struggling with this and this is such a hot topic and a big issue for me, I'm guessing it's the same thing for other, for our clients and for other plan sponsors out there. So But I definitely felt like it wasn't my area of expertise, and so invited Richard and Shawn to assist me today. So I just share that with you just so that you have a little bit of context for what was the inspiration for today, and why I'm not, serving in a larger role today. But I'm absolutely thrilled to have Richard and Shawn along the way as Richard and Shawn share their content. If you've got questions, as the moderator, I'm going to be enter them in the chat box, and I'm going to be monitoring the chat box. We hope to have plenty of time at the end of the presentations today to respond to questions. Obviously, if we don't get to everybody's question, we'll follow up with you after the fact. So without further ado, I'm going to ask Richard to start with this, and just a little bit of warning. Richard, I don't want you to feel too sorry for him, but he resides in the U.S. Virgin Islands, and so he's calling in, Zooming in today, or webinaring in from there. And so we're hoping that we have a good connection. We've had good connections as we've gone through the planning process for today, but just wanted to warn everybody that there may be some connectivity issues there as we go through his portion of the program. So Richard, I will let you take it away. Thank you very much.
She said, I've been in the business a long time, and really had a fortunate career. The first TPA I worked at, I was the fair-haired lad at the firm because the owner of the firm just liked me. And in 1980, he said, I'd like you to look at this new section that was added to the code, and that was 401k, and put together a business plan and see if there's any opportunities for us. So I put together a business plan and made recommendations on how we should go forward. And probably the only mistake I made, I realized it. That was 39 years ago, almost to the day. But when we put it in, the mistake I made was that, during my research, the United States Treasury was adamantly against these sorts of plans. And if you look at what the cost considerations were in the Revenue Act of 1978, 401k plans adding that provision is thought to be nil, very little impact. And I thought back while I was just preparing for this that, gosh, I was 25 years old at the time. I was a kid. Years later, I started my own business that basically answered questions for other professionals in the business. And most of the TPAs and most of the record keepers were clients. They became friends. So I know people. And one of our services were to answer questions. We answered hundreds a day. A factor of 10 to 15 more got their answers directly from the website. And one thing that became crystal clear is there's a huge disparity between the qualifications of TPA firms, lesser degree of record keepers. After I sold my business, my wife wanted me to retire, but it didn't take. It's a lot more rewarding being a consultant when you're free to speak your mind, and I usually am. One of my largest record keeping clients, he gave me the best compliment I've ever received. He said, Richard, besides my wife, you're the only person who's not afraid to tell me I'm full of shoot. I can speak my mind and say my opinion. I'll try not to offend anybody. During this period of time when I sold the business, before I met a gentleman by the name of Carlos Panksepp, I was at a conference, and he was running the CFEX certification program for the ASPA best practices. This is best practices for record keeping and TPAs. I remember meeting at the conference. He said, what do you think of the CFEX program? I don't know. I never heard of it before. And he told me that, gee, that makes a lot of sense. I really like to help you. So I probably do a lot of CFEX certifications. It's not the only certification for a TPA, and there are some good TPAs that are not CFEX certified. But as a plan sponsor, I think it's incumbent to say, did somebody else look at your operations? Because I've got stories that would curl your hair. But here today, we're talking about stealing from 401k plans. And there's been stealing from 401k plans almost as long as I've been in the business, not just 401ks, it's everyone. It's just the actors have changed. And I'm often asked, I've written a few articles on the subject and been interviewed for a lot more. Why are 401k plans targeted? And I kind of laugh at it. Willie Sutton was a notorious bank robber. And The story is that when asked, why did he rob banks? He responded, because that's where the money is. And wire 401k plans is there's $6 trillion there, largely don't have the same security that would hold $6 trillion would. I've used the Willie Sutton thing for a long time because the firm I used to work with, the owner thought it was just a great story. He denies ever saying that's where the money is. He always carried a pistol when he robbed a bank, but it was empty. If somebody cried during the robbery, he would just leave because it took all the fun out of it. He just robbed banks because he really liked to. And I'm mentioning this at a cocktail party years ago. I brought the reference up, and it was a cardiologist. She says, in medicine, there's a term for that. It's called Sutton's Law. And the basic rule is when diagnosing an ailment, look for the obvious. And I knew there's the Willie Sutton rule in cost accounting. It says analysis should be applied where the greatest costs occur. But the theft of participant accounts in a 401k plan is relatively new. The first incident I can tell was in late 2014, 2015, early 2015. The first one I saw while visiting a TPA was in early 2016. And the next week, I was at a different TPA, different part of the country, discovered the same sort of operation. A week later, I was at a record-keeping client. You start out the meeting saying what sort of innovations you've put in, what sort of enhancements. And the management team responded with a list of them. And at the top of the list was, we've tightened up our security processes for distributions. Oh, that's good. That's, I've heard that there's problems with them. Well, after interviewing the participants, I found out, or the employees there, I found out why they instituted this, because they'd been burned. Almost every record keeper has had a loss, and they're abundantly aware of it. Prior to the bad guys stealing from 401k plans, it was generally employees of the plan sponsor, normally bookkeepers or secretaries, spouses or soon to be ex-spouses. This is not a one-off. This isn't a spouse this is organized crime. So what makes the plans vulnerable? Most, not all, but most of the record keeping systems have 20th century technology at their base. This has been rapidly changing over the last 5 years, but it still exists. And a lot of the stuff just wasn't on the radar. And this is even with big companies. When I was with Aon, we developed a daily record keeping system, and we were transferring things to our plans to our new toy. And I had a rental car company as a client, and I don't know, they probably had $500 million in the plan. And we were going to convert from their current system to our daily Val system. It was a Friday. We're going to do it over the weekend. It was a Friday afternoon. I was sitting in my office, feet up on the desk, as you can imagine. Talked to the guy, and then said, okay, we need to send the money before close of business. And I read him the wire account for it to go to. He wrote down, repeated it back. I said it again. He repeated it back. And when I was driving home that evening, I thought, this is crazy. This guy is transferring $500 million to a number I just gave him. And if I were less professional or more prepared, I would have been headed towards the airport. I mean, it was that loose. And, I called my boss up and said, hey, we need to do something like right now to stop this. There shouldn't be one person that has that much authority to move money. And this is fundamental, especially the transition people made from being a TPA to being a record keeper, and there are a lot of those, where they weren't used to handling real money. The initial systems were designed about accuracy, efficiency, security, not so much. Probably the biggest issue, and this goes on with record keepers and TPAs, is not knowing the participant. A couple of years ago, I had a new client in Guam. It's a beautiful place, but it takes a long time to get there. You just think of a place that you fly to Honolulu and you're halfway there. I thought, well, I never fly this airline. I'll sign up for their frequent flyer miles. I answered more security questions on an airline frequent flyer questionnaire or application than most 401k plans have. So you've got millions of participants that they don't know very much about them. So setting up things like multi-factor authentication is difficult for the record keepers. The record keepers are making dramatic enhancements in their systems, and they're a better resource to use than most of the other actors in the business. I did a project with Nationwide that brought together the IT department for the larger TPAs in the country. And we spent some time going through their IT department and going through their data center. And it's impressive. I mean, they have technology that recognizes how long it takes to log in. They can hear the ambient noises on the phone call to tell if the call's originating outside the United States. But participant data, that's a lot harder to change because there are 159 million things you have to do. But it's getting better. Another things that make them vulnerable is, we advisors, the public press is saying, you don't need to look at your 401k statement. You don't need to monitor it every day. Choose your investment philosophy, monitor it once a year. The bad guys know about this. Exacerbating this is historically, and quite frankly, most of the CFEX best practices are around protecting PII. And that's the primary focus, and it's a good focus. But in a large portion of the scams, the criminals are using data that doesn't have PII. They're building their base based on signatures. If they can intercept a distribution form that has the signature of the plan administrator. There's a recent case in Pennsylvania, a very good TPA firm that was dealing with an attorney who was their client. The partner of the attorney, who was also the named fiduciary, requested an in-service distribution of $15,000 or $20,000. The administrative assistant was a remote employee, and she'd like to conduct business sometimes using her Gmail account. Unfortunately, that was compromised. So the bad guys got a hold of it and systematically drained $400,000 or $500,000 over this account. And that went into the question of who's responsible. The courts basically ruled that the insurance company and the TPA were functional fiduciaries, even when they disclaimed fiduciary responsibility. That one's still under litigation. But when something goes wrong, who is responsible? It's like your credit card. Somebody steals it, that information, they're going to make good at it. But it's still uncertain at this time. The two cases that have gotten the most information or the most press are Estee Lauder and Abbott Labs. And again, as a disclaimer, the record-keeping firm, a company called Alight. Alight is what used to be Aon Hewitt, and since I'm an ex-Aon person, they're a good firm. You looked at it and said, you're doing your due diligence, you say, these guys are the closest thing to the IT rule is you can't get fired for hiring IBM. 70 of the largest 100 DC plans in the United States are administered by Alight. But in Estee Lauder, and this has some interesting points, they all involved a participant who had been terminated and maintained their account for a long time. In this case, it was late 2016. There's 3 distributions, 37,000, 52,000, and 12,000. And it was discovered by the participant when she got her third quarter statement. She called the police, she called the FBI, and later she was informed by Alight, quote, the investigation had run its court and none of the missing funds had been recovered. And there would be no plan account would be reimbursed. Okay. In Abbott Labs, same sort of thing. The participant been gone about 7 or 8 years. And this one, it went back and forth. They took out the bad guys stole $245,000. And she had signed up to be notified of all changes to the plan by email. For some reason, Alight sent the distribution confirmation by regular mail to the participant. And they'd been going back and forth for a couple of weeks before this, just to say, I want this account really locked down because passwords had changed. Well, by the time the mail got there, that was the exact day the bad guys took all the money. DOL investigated Alight and alleges that they failed to disclose cybersecurity breaches and unauthorized distributions for months, if at all, and repeatedly failed to restore unauthorized amounts. In most of the distribution frauds, the bad guy will request withholding because it looks more legitimate, I guess. So they were able to recover the tax withholding and another account that the fraudster didn't clear up. And according to the complaint, Alight offered to reimburse 10% of the participant losses. And I've got, I visited a small group, did the CFEX certification, and a potential fraudulent distribution was the reason they hired us. This is a small firm. They're an advisor also, and they have a client that probably amounts to 15% of the firm's revenue. They'd processed a $500,000 in-service distribution to the owner of the firm. The check was written. Wasn't until after it was written that the insurance company platform set up some red flags and they stopped payment on the check. Well, it scared the heck out of this woman. It scared the heck out of her. She said, first of all, we could come up to $500,000 to reimburse the participant, but we'd lose the account. I mean, all the stories and anecdotes are nice, but what can you do to protect yourself? Probably the biggest thing, know who the service providers are, and probably document why you hired them. You ought to be asking them some questions. It's fair game to ask a service provider, how do you deal with participant fraud? There's some firms that say, it's been our practice so far to reimburse the accounts. A lot of them are losing their appetite for them. The more of these stories that show up in the newspapers showing an old woman who's getting ready for retirement, who had her account drained, and some large corporation owned by a hedge fund is not willing to reimburse the account. You don't have to be Nostradamus to know what's going to happen from the regulators or the legislators. But it's worth a question with any service providers, a plan sponsor. You should ask some questions, and the question shouldn't stop at how much is it, because firms offering services, they should be within a few $100s. They're very rarely way outside unless you're going with a mega firm. But it said, does anybody look at your operations on a regular basis? Do you get a SOC 1, a SOC 2? Does your accounting firm come and look at your controls? Do you have E&O insurance? Do you have cyber insurance? Those are fair questions. And again, you need to document why we chose to hire them. Because, and this is especially true if you're having the participants, in essence, pay for that service. Because you're acting as a fiduciary, and it's your responsibility to do things for their best interest, not just to save a couple $100, which in many cases you're not saving anyway.
Hey, Richard.
Yes, sir.
This is Paul. I was reading an article, just since you're talking about this specific thing, reading an article the other day about cybersecurity and 401k plans, and it was basically concluding that in terms of fiduciary responsibilities for plan sponsors, historically it's always been about protecting the money, the processes surrounding the plan, but and the fees. Certainly, the fees have always been a big fiduciary responsibility. But the article was making the point that inquiring about cybersecurity policies and procedures at the record keepers or other service providers is an equally large task for fiduciaries of plans. So, can you brushed over SOC 1 and SOC 2 reports? Can you kind of give a little more detail in terms of what the resources there for plan sponsors to learn about the actual processes in place at Record Keepers?
Well, one of the things that I've been fortunate at Record Keepers is saying a lot of them have elite TPA groups. They range from a couple hundred to 1,000. That record keepers should know who their partners are. The basic point is if there's a lawsuit, as attorneys are wont to do, they're going to pull in everybody they think could possibly be responsible, and especially those that have a lot of money. The question will come if you've got a small TPA that doesn't have adequate IT security. A jury's going to say to Acme Insurance Company, you knew or should have known that they didn't have adequate policies. There's no big record keeper, and I know a lot of people there, and they're friends, and they're good people. I have a number they basically don't know due diligence. There's none. One of their national guys told me, hey, I'm an asset collector. If they bring me assets, that's my job. That's just an accident waiting to happen. Most of them are getting a lot better. The big issue, I talked about not knowing the participant, is when the participant's been gone for years and years, it's hard to confirm at that point who they are. So, a best practice is to say, you have money in the 401k plan, you ought to log in and things like cell phone number, the types of security that the major record keepers have, and they're doing much, much better job at it. The mid-sized ones, not so much. And that's part of the complexity of dealing with this is part of the reason of the consolidation of record keeping firms is the IT spend is enormous. But I dealt with a lot of these things. There's a case in Tennessee. I've worked with all of the parties, and a participant sent in a distribution request to a fiduciary, an independent fiduciary for the plan. I'd advise them that they do more to determine who the participant is. They asked what? And I said, I'm not sure, but you need to know whether it's talking to them or something. They went with the driver's license. I saw the distribution package in question. It was from the participant, had a copy of a Texas driver's license, front and back. The person at the fiduciary firm looked up his LinkedIn profile and compared the photos. It looked like him. Everything else seemed to be in order, except a phone call to the client saying, was this really requested? And they passed the distribution on to the TPA. The TPA did their work, passed it on to the record keeper. The record keeper, to their credit, responded back to the TPA saying, the account you're sending this money to is not associated with the retirement account, and it was opened in the last 3 days. It looks like fraud. Should we proceed? And the woman at the TPA emailed back within 2 minutes saying, yeah, it's already been approved. Go ahead and pay it. What was that, $265,000? Something like that. And everybody was pointing their finger towards somebody else. All three of them ended up paying an equal portion. I had a New York case with a record keeper. I've been telling you got to focus on this. This is an issue. I was leaving on a trip last year, just as heading out the door, called me up and said, hey, we got hit. Paid out somebody they got scammed for $180,000. And I told this guy, you're probably going to be, I don't care if you got cyber insurance, you're probably going to be on the hook for this. And he didn't have the cyber coverage. And he kept thinking of ways that maybe he could get out of it. And, I'm driving to the airport and he's saying, calls back in and says, why should I be responsible for this if somebody had their identity stolen? You've got a point. It's just not going to hold up. You can't have money taken from old women and think that's going to fly in court. It's not going to fly with the legislature. It's not going to fly with regulation. You're going to end up paying for it. But as soon as it gets commonplace for people not to reimburse the accounts, and they're losing their appetite on this thing. But part of it is their fault. I had a case in Indiana where the fraudster didn't use any high-tech sort of things. He just found the person that processed the distribution and at the CPA and continued to call her up. And he had a great story. His grandson was going in the hospital, and he wouldn't start any of the procedures until he gave them a down payment. And the woman felt badly and sort of circumvented some of the controls they had. 250 gone.
I guess I'll sum up, your portion of the program by saying, we talked about what makes 401k plans vulnerable. We talked about who's responsible for when there's a loss. And right now it's the position of the courts as plan sponsors and record keepers and TPAs potentially, depending on their involvement. And then we also talked about some prevention measures, some just real basic prevention measures that plan sponsors can take when they're doing their due diligence. And I think
those are using a secured machine, doing some due diligence beforehand. Don't be loose with the security of transmitting data.
So let's switch gears now and let's bring Shawn into this discussion. Welcome, Shawn. Thanks for participating today. Why don't you give folks just a real quick background in terms of what you do with Ray and Associates, but mostly what I wanted you to accomplish, and I think you've done that. I've looked at your slides. Is just kind of help plan sponsors kind of understand what the cybersecurity ecosystem, what the risks are out there, and from your perspective, what we can do to kind of lock down our plans as best we possibly can.
Awesome. Thanks for the introduction, Paul. Good morning, everyone. My name is Shawn Richardson. I'm the Director of Cybersecurity Services segment at Ray and Associates. What we do is we've got a team that looks at cyber risk from a business perspective. So we don't like to lead with technical jargon. We don't like to lead with a bunch of technical glorious names and all kinds of different hardware and software. We want to understand business practices first, and we believe that that's important in order for us to determine what cyber risk you have within your business. Specific to what we're talking about today, if you go ahead and move on to the next slide here, I'll give you a general overview. Here's our agenda, and we're going to have a poll question for everyone so we can get audience involved. And go ahead and move on to the cyber risk overview there. So in jest, Richard has talked a little bit about some specific risks as it relates to cyber. Companies and individuals really are scrambling right now. The threat landscape is just it's heightened even more now that everybody's working from home, right? So I think the statistic currently is cyber attacks are up about 400% through COVID. And so with that said, everyone's scrambling to try to take a look at their personal security, but specifically to plan sponsors and record keepers, they're just not, in some cases, we talked about some of the smaller and the medium-sized entities that just don't have, they lack the oversight, they lack the controls, there's nobody watching, really, and that's important to call out because somebody has to be looking at whether your email is in the cloud with Microsoft 365 or whether it's in G Suite or hosted internally in your business. There's got to be somebody watching, and frankly, all of this has been overlooked until the last few years, right? Where and I like to lead with where's your data. Like where is the most important data that you have? So let's go ahead and pause right here and go to a poll question. And my question for you, and we've got it up on the screen. You can go ahead and interact with our webinar here. Have you, as a plan sponsor, reviewed the controls of your plan's record keeper? We've talked a little bit about some examples of record keepers that have been hacked and have been compromised. And so we'll just pause right here and allow you guys to answer that question. We'll take a couple seconds here. And I expected this to be pretty even. Like to be honest, there's a lot of unknowns, right? Likely why you're here. So The next question I would have, and it leads into our next slide, is why are 401k plans and retirement plans being compromised, right? What's the reason behind that? So a lot of the plan sponsors and record keepers, frankly, and other service providers, they hold a wealth of information. Anything from employee census data to PII, compensation rates, distribution forms, plan account information, the list goes on, right? And these are all building blocks for identity theft. And frankly, a hack or a compromise within a plan is, in essence, could mean that somebody has someone else's identity, or it could be something as simple as an example we'll give here in just a second. We're going to go into a little bit more detail, granular detail about the Abbott Labs compromise. So some examples of how data can be breached. Richard talked about it, touched on it just a little bit, but passwords have become kind of a commodity and an afterthought to people, right? They're not taking the vested interest in lengthening passwords, using password phrases, and so then what happens is accounts get compromised. Everyone is familiar with the term phishing and spear phishing. So the difference there is phishing is a simple email that goes out that has bad code in it from the bad actors, or a link that has a bad link that they want you to entice you to use social engineering for you to click on that link so they can own your account. Spear phishing is a more directed attack to the likes of a Paul McEwen, if you would, someone who leads an organization, myself, who leads a cybersecurity, a CEO, a COO, or in this particular case, a plan sponsor or a record keeper. Misplaced laptops, stolen devices, the list goes on. And then lastly, the compromising of networks and using vulnerabilities within networks, both at you at the business or at your clients. So let me real briefly talk about three primary breaches. These are the three primary breaches that, and we're going to explain them just at a high level. A breach that's just an incident, a theft breach, and a copy breach. So what are those? Let's go to the next slide here. So a breach that's just an incident is typically an attack that is disrupting access to something, but it doesn't affect confidentiality, integrity of your data or your plan information, okay? An example would be a denial of service attack, or someone just sending a flood of emails to try to get you to click on something, or a pop-up on your virus protection or what have you. Those are incidents, but they could have massive impacts to your business and to your plan sponsors and record keepers due to downtime and disruptions and so on. So number two would be the actual theft, unauthorized access to an account, to information, and then that information is used to compromise a system and commit some sort of fraud through electronic transactions. And then finally, the number three is the copy breach, okay? And so your data is still there. All the things we talked about, your compensation information, your data, your plan information, all that's still there, but the data is stolen. It's copied out of the environment. And a lot of times this takes like 6 to 9 months and upwards of a year for anyone to even find out, because we talked about earlier, right? Nobody's watching. So, the average cost here could be upwards of $1 to $3 million, when it is found. So what considerations can we take, right? What are steps that we can take to consider protecting ourselves? And so on to the next slide here, we're going to talk about that. Or actually, I stand corrected. Let's talk about this breach example real quick. And of course, we're talking about the Abbott Labs stock retirement plan, and this is public information. And so how did this happen? So the plan sponsor, who was Abbott Labs, and an officer that served as the plan's named fiduciary administrator, and the plan's record keeper Light breached their fiduciary duties under ERISA, failing to prevent the cyber theft. All right, that was the claim. Now, what happened? All right, how did that happen? The cyber thief clicked on the forgot password. They already owned the individual's email account. Okay, so they went in and compromised that platform's email system. All right, whether it be Microsoft 365 or G Suite or your internal email or what have you. And then they gained access to the plan, the account, the individual's account, because they requested their own password that they already had access to that email account. And then lastly, after that 7-day minimum, in accordance with the record keeper's response policy period, transfers were sent out in excess of $245,000. So this is a real life, real world example. Considerations. How can we prevent this, right? Let's talk about that. All right. So what should you as plan holders and plan sponsors and even holding your record keepers responsible? One of the very first things we like to do as an organization is ensure that we propose an information security risk assessment or some sort of system overview of data and controls. And some examples would be, data points there would be, things like SOC audits, asking for those reports. That's huge, because inside those reports, they are required to follow a very stringent guideline of set of controls, okay? Training your employees and making sure that you prepare your employees and your clients for the inevitable. Setting the expectation of cybersecurity awareness and bringing a professional advisor in, a trusted advisor, or just hire one. We talked about budgets earlier, and frankly, I get it. I understand that it's a challenge. We help folks build those budgets within our programs, right? Because they just never had it before. And then those annual risk assessments ultimately utilize a viable and accepted framework. All right, what does a framework mean? That's a set of controls. All right, here are some things that you should be doing right now. All right, Richard mentioned multi-factor authentication earlier. If you're not using multi-factor authentication for your plans, your sponsors, record keepers, that's a no-no. You absolutely need to get that way as soon as possible. Back up and test your critical data. Maintaining proper updating of your systems, ensuring that your systems and software have a continual inventory of assets. Know where your data is, know where your assets are. If you got people working from home that are accessing plans, are they using VPN? If you don't know what VPN is, that's a virtual private network. It's an encrypted tunnel, a protected highway that connects you from your home network to your work network, okay? And then go on a data diet. What does that mean? Data is like cash these days, folks. So if your client's data is not protected, treat it like cash. So I'll touch real quick, because I only know we have a couple more minutes here. This is our approach here at Ray Cyber Services. We have a unique hands-on approach. We use a defense in-depth cybersecurity roadmap. I am a retired U.S. Army Master Sergeant. I used to work and run a team of about 440 hackers for the U.S. Cyber Command, and so I have this approach of taking that technical out and looking at the business first and providing a layered defense in-depth approach that doesn't break the bank, if you will. Again, data first. We have an Ignite Your Compliance program that builds out this program for you. We have a program that we use that we built that has all the frameworks already installed. And so we're able to identify right away what is hot, sharp, and dangerous inside your environment, inside the record keeper's environment, or what's dangerous to your retirement plans. So we touched a little bit on cyber insurance. If you want more information, reach out to me. We can get you some more information. But in jest, that is a new trend that you absolutely need to take a look at as an organization. Okay, it's something that a lot of people don't understand. They can't be articulate it, but they can't understand what are the coverage, the different coverages that come along with that as well. It's an informed decision that has to be made by the business. So I hope this information is helpful, and I know we only have a few minutes here, so maybe we should. I love this slide, by the way. Think about all the world that we have going on. We've got millions and millions of apps. There's billions of people connected, and oh, by the way, as an information security program or just information security in general, we've got about 3 million of those being shortfalls, right? Gaps, and so we want to help close those gaps.
All right. Hey, Shawn, I really appreciate that. We are quickly running out of time. I have one question that I wanted to direct to Richard, and that is, given all that we've heard today, what impact does cybersecurity, what impact should that have on our RFP process? If a plan sponsor is going through a request for proposal, considering a different record keeper, or maybe even reviewing the current record keeper, what types of things should be included in that RFP process? How should that change in light of the current risks of cybersecurity?
They ought to have written policies on, most of the firms are working remotely or some level of remotely. You should ask what those written policies, do they have policies on data breaches? God, there's a whole litany of them. Do they have they had SOC 1 or SOC 2? SOC 2, they should probably have both. If you're a record keeper, you should have both.
I agree with that.
I wouldn't hire a record keeper that didn't have both.
Can you quickly clarify the difference between a SOC 1 and a SOC 2?
Well, the SOC 2 focuses mostly on cyber issues. You lay out the policies and you have somebody come in and audit that they're actually following those. Most of the large record keepers have both. You ought to at least ask the question. I would also ask the question of what their policy is on fraudulent distributions, because it varies between record keepers, and you don't have to be shy in an RFP.
Oh, I'd like to add to, so we actually have a SOC team here at Ray and Associates within our team, and I don't know if you knew that or not, but Brian Garland and Paul Hugenberg are leading that, and so we can do SOC reviews as well. But Richard's exactly right. That SOC 2 report and or set of controls is what you should be looking for. And if they don't have a set of policies that back that up, that's absolutely critical. That's absolutely critical because that they should be following, those controls and following those policies, on a consistent basis.
All right. Thank you, guys. We are at 10 o'clock, and I want to be respectful of everybody's time. I apologize, but we didn't have more time for questions. We were hoping to get through the material, but obviously we had lots of stories to share. Hopefully you've got some actionable items that you can take away from today's webinar, just in terms of your own plan, ways to protect the assets from cyber theft. Thank you very much for attending. If you have any follow-up questions, don't hesitate to reach out to Shawn or Richard or me with questions regarding your plan. And we appreciate your attending today. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Paul, and thank you for joining us for today's webinar, Hackers Want Access to Your Company's Retirement Plans Account 2. We hope the team was able to provide you with some valuable insight in regards to best practices and possible solutions. If you sign off today and realize that you have additional questions, like Paul said, you're always welcome to reach out to Paul, Shawn, and Richard directly. And of course, on our website at www.raycpa.com, that's REA. And thank you again, and we hope you have a great day.